I think everybody should just pull up their chairs and gather around the table if you're comfortable in the egalitarian spirit of this event. Yeah. So pull on up.
We got 2 chairs over here.
Yeah, and then the chairs are all on wheels, and people can squeeze in. It'll be lovely. Trust.
Oh, excellent.
Right. So welcome everyone. I'm really glad that people showed up on this wintry Thursday afternoon for today's discussion about student activism across the generations. My name is Arkan Fong. I'm a faculty member here at the Kennedy School and director of the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. And I just wanted to start off with just a couple of announcements before I introduce Tova and Michael and get into the substance of today's discussion. The Ash Center acknowledges that the land on which Harvard University sits is the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people. We also recognize the continuing presence of the neighboring Wampanoag and Nipmuc nations. Today's discussion is being recorded and will be publicly available on the Ash Center's YouTube page, so be aware of that as you're asking questions or making comments yourself. Tova Kaplan, to my left, is a member of the Harvard College class of 2026, concentrating in government with a secondary in economics, and she's from Chicago. She's worked in a wide range of organizations in government, civic education, political organizing, including the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the Democratic National Committee, and America 250. And she's a co-founder of Students for Freedom, whose mission is to, quote, push Harvard to reject all demands by the Trump administration, especially the most unreasonable ones. It doesn't say that threaten academic or personal freedoms. And last week, I didn't know this, she testified before the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights about her experiences as a Jewish student on Harvard's campus. Michael Ansara is a longtime organizer. He arrived at Harvard in the fall of 1964 and became leader of, I think, probably the just then forming Harvard-Radcliffe chapter of the Students for Democratic Society, and then a regional organizer for SDS later. And then after Harvard, he went on to organize on economic inclusion and poverty issues and inequality issues in Boston. Spent more time organizing against the war in Vietnam, went on to train many organizers and worked on many, many political campaigns. And a big part of the occasion for this event is Michael's recent book, The Hard Work of Hope, which is a wonderful political biography, which everyone should have a look at. So please join me in welcoming Tova and Michael. I'll moderate the discussion for about the next 30 to 35 minutes, and then we'll open it up for question and answer. And as I was sitting here thinking about the event, it occurred to me that I'm kind of in the middle of a sandwich of activism in generations between Michael and Tova. And then the scary thing that occurred to me is I'm slightly closer to Michael's generation than to Tova's generation, which, like, once I did the math, I was imagined myself as being much more closer to Tova's generation. But alas, that's not the case mathematically. But spiritually, I feel like it is. Okay. Why don't we begin a little bit with a little bit of origin and biography? So maybe we'll do it in reverse chronological order and begin with Tova. Tova, how did you first get interested in advocacy and politics and social issues? And was it at Harvard or before?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you for inviting me to speak, Arkan. It's such an honor to be here. Like, I was reading Michael's autobiography, and it's almost unbelievable to get to sit up here with you and have this conversation. So I think my interest in politics and advocacy started when I was quite young. I'm from Chicago, and I grew up in a community that has a lot of Holocaust survivors in it. So just being part of that Jewish community, I think I was very lucky to have that be a really big part of my life. Like, I think these stories and memories of, the dangers of authoritarianism, and they were never abstract. They were things that had happened to people who were in my community. And my parents never really censored any of that from me. So from a young age, I think I was always pretty aware of um, the slippery slope of what could happen if people aren't upstanders, they don't speak out when they can. I never I didn't think of it in those analytic terms when I was a kid, but I think that was always in the background of my mind. And I grew up with the question of what made the difference between those people who were the heroes in the stories, I would be told, like the ones who stood up and fought back, and who were the ones who were silent or assisted. Um, so I think that always mattered to me. But then my real interest in sort of advocacy directly came when I was young. I was 12. I switched from like a small, pretty homogenous public school to a really big, diverse one called Whitney Young High School in Chicago. It was built as a desegregation effort for Chicago public schools because it was built in 1975, actually on a block in a neighborhood in Chicago that had been burned down in a lot of the civil unrest. And so the structure of the school is that you test in, it's public, but they take sort of top scoring students from each neighborhood, which in Chicago is basically a proxy for race and socioeconomic status. And so I was really lucky from a pretty young age to get to be in this really thriving community where there were people from every corner of the city. It was majority low income, majority non-white, and it was just a very vibrant and nurturing student community. And so I think growing up, I had this sense that I wasn't learning about issues like gun violence or economic inequality from like an abstract point of view, academic. You learn about it, you get upset about it, and then you go do something about it. But these were things that were happening to people I care about. My best friend is from North Lawndale, which is one of the lowest income neighborhoods in Chicago. And during the pandemic, I saw how her family was really struggling economically. She actually developed a neurological disorder from the stress of gun violence in her neighborhood. And so like all of these issues I felt very connected to. And there was a very strong culture of activism and advocacy there. And I just
In high school.
in high school.
Yeah.
And I mean I went to high school during a pretty big time in student activism. I was there. I was in eighth grade during the Parkland walkouts. I was there during the pandemic, Black Lives Matter movement, and a lot of I looked up to these older students who were such leaders in their own communities. And then I think coming to Harvard, I studied government and have really enjoyed studying issues academically. I study comparative government and was always particularly interested in issues of democracy and authoritarianism. And then last spring happened, and a lot of those questions felt less academic and more ever present. So I feel very lucky that I think my education, both when I was younger and also at Harvard, taught me to recognize a lot of the signs and feel a sense of panic when things start to go wrong, and knowing the stakes of things. So that's how I got here.
Wow, that's so fascinating. I'm not very given to self-reflection, and an early conversation I had with Marshall Gans when I was just arriving here, he forces people to self-reflect in a one-on-one, and so he asked me this version of the question I just asked you, and I guess my first political memory, it wasn't even proto-political or about the movies or something. It was, it was before streaming, like we had TVs and families would watch TV after dinner, and it was a program about the Japanese and the internment camps during World War II. And I'm not Japanese, I'm Chinese American. But that's my first political recollection, is like, wow, there could be like a government putting people in a category in basically, in camps and detention camps.
Yeah.
And so it was also, your story made me think of that, because your thing was like an authoritarian memory, and this is like a different kind of, which is like not your usual kind of thing to worry about as an American activist, like you worry about all kinds of other things.
Well, to say first political memory too, like similarly, I remember in third grade, my third grade teacher showed us videos of the civil rights movement and of young students getting hosed down with water hoses. And I remember she said before she showed that to us, like at third grade, like very, very young, she said, if you want to leave the room, you can, but these students were your age. And so I think you should watch it. That's why I'm showing it to you. And I remember like that to me unlocked that lineage too.
Yeah. And
Birmingham, that was Birmingham.
yeah. And so, Michael, my guess is your high school was not brimming with student activism. And so, what's your origin story?
First, let me just say it's a great honor to be with you, Tova, and you, Archon, and with all of you. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be able to be in conversation with you. And I did write this for you, so it's available as a digital book, paperback, and in April as an audiobook. So let me respond on a couple of things that you said. So there's the proto-political. There's the sort of what you absorb when you're young. And there were pivotal messages that I absorbed. One was the Hungarian Revolt of 1956, in which I saw on television young people going up against tanks. And that was like, to rebel is good. To be courageous is good. And I remember
also an anti-authoritarian memory, right?
And just absorbing that, and also that melded with two things for me. One was all of the westerns that I saw. You know, real men lead that wagon train. Real men step out at high noon and take on the bad guys. Real men, and you know, I really absorbed all of that. And then I loved American history, and loved both the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. And, you know, I had this preoccupation with the Declaration of Independence because when it said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I was just transfixed by the pursuit of happiness. What an interest in not the pursuit of profit, not the pursuit of security, the pursuit of happiness as a right. And so all of that primed me. And then I was 13. Who can remember being 13? Not long ago for all of you, right? So at 13, I was miserable, absolutely miserable. You know, wrong body, wrong family, wrong century, wrong everything. And the first experience I had was in the civil defense drills of those days, and duck and cover. And I'm looking up at the
Do you guys know what that is?
So we would practice what to do in the case of a nuclear attack.
It was scary as hell.
You go down into the basement. You go down into the basement to the bomb shelter, and they would stress duck and cover, as in get under and hold yourself down. And then they would stress over and over again, don't look up at the time of the blast. You might be blinded. And I was looking at a poster on the wall. This is 9th grade in high school. I'm looking at a poster on the wall of concentric circles, in which the center circle, everything is cinder. The next circle, everything is dead because the oxygen is consumed. So there's no oxygen. And the third circle is radiation fallout and huge winds and firestorms. And it going out by miles. And I say to the teacher, wait a minute. We're 8 miles from the South Boston Army base. We're all dead. Why should we worry about looking up? Detention. My first actual protest.
Fighting the man.
But here's the thing. It wasn't done with hope. It was done with complete despair.
Yeah.
The world is crazy. Everybody's crazy. And then I walked by a picket line outside of a Woolworths store and stopped and talked with the few students that were there. And they explained that they were picketing in support of the students in North Carolina who were sitting in at the Woolworths counter trying to get a cup of coffee. And just clicked. It was like, of course. And, you know, it sounds like hyperbole, but I stepped into that picket line and into the movement and was transformed. I felt pulled by this enormous sense of hope and possibility and solidarity and meaning, and went on before I came to Harvard to work with this amazing group of Black organizers in Boston. I say this every time. I have no idea what they saw in this 13, 14, 15-year-old, pimply, innocent, just naive child. But for some reason, they were incredibly generous, and they took me in and they taught me organizing. I mean, literally taught me how to knock doors, how to do one-on-ones, how to build block captains, how to launch a boycott of Wonder Bread, the ubiquitous white bread made by the Continental Baking Company that had a factory in the middle of Roxbury and refused to hire Black people for anything except the lowest paid, most menial jobs, and launch a boycott. And we won 7 or 8 good paying jobs. And I saw what people could do when they organized together. And I saw what would happen when people are in a movement and step out of their ordinary lives and how they can do extraordinary things. And I fell madly in love with the civil rights movement, particularly the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and lived to go to Mississippi in '64. Couldn't go because my family was desperately in need of money and I had to stay and work. But everything was shaped by that movement and that sense that organizing is essential and that organizing is possible. And so when I came to Harvard in the fall of '64, I knew in my bones, it's interesting, you know, how little I really knew, but I knew in my bones that a new student movement was possible.
Yeah.
And I came to Harvard to create a new left, a new student movement, and to shape the future.
Tova, I don't know what your first experience of organizing and advocacy with an organization, whether it was with Sunrise or movement for Black Lives or the Parkland, what's that? March for Our Lives. But did you have a similar experience of clicking? I hadn't heard you talk about it that way, Michael, but it's striking. It's like, this is what I need to be doing. And if not here, somewhere else, but something like this. Did you?
I mean, I think it wasn't as instantaneous for me. I think it was more driven by a sense that I did want to do something in public service, and that I felt, I've always just felt a lot of gratitude to be where I am, both in high school, like I just loved that experience and so grateful to be here. And then certainly being at Harvard, I never expected to be here. I was the only person from my year to end up here, and like, I'm a senior. I've not become jaded yet. That's something I'm proud of. Like, I think
there's still time.
And there's still a few months left. Yeah, I'm not writing a thesis though, so that helps with the jadedness. But every day I genuinely do wake up and I'm very grateful to be here. And so I feel like I do really want to give back with my life and my career, whatever that ends up being. That's just a very genuine value I have. And so I think, to me, organizing and activism is something I found myself doing because I felt that I just feel like whatever community I'm in, I want to give back in the way that's best. And the time that I've been at Harvard has been a time where it's been really necessary to get involved in organizing. And we have been so in the spotlight with the Trump administration. And I feel like one of the biggest political battles of our time has involved our school. So I felt an obligation to get involved and help organize things here. But I think it's not as driven by, I think, that the tactics itself.
Right.
But I love it.
I mean, I was just thinking about what Michael said about the click, and I guess, like, for me, what is that click in college and then later in grad school? I guess it was 2 things. One, it was, these are people that really share my values, and that feels really good, and I want to be in community like that. But then also, it's like, this is the important thing to be working. I could be working on a million other things, but this is like really important. And so maybe it's both, both of those kinds of things. I'm sure it varies per person. So I wanted to, next thing I wanted to explore is, I don't know how to put this exactly, the difference in, there's Marshall. Just talking about you. Somewhere around the table. Is the different priorities in organizing in both of your experiences.
Sorry for the distraction.
So you're doing a lot of things when you're organizing at the same time. And I guess I wanted to explore whether you have an ordering of these different things and whether it was different has been different in your two experiences, right? So one of the things you're trying to do, which is core to organizing, is persuade other students on campus. A second thing you're trying to do is push the administration to do this or that thing. And it was obviously different things in both of your experiences, but both of you are pushing or pushing. A third is that you're trying to create an organization that is consistent with and prefigures the values that you'd like to see in the broader world. And this is absolutely clear in SDS for sure. And I don't know what it's like now for you guys. And then a fourth thing is you're trying to address people outside of campus and as talked about the importance of freedom of expression and academic freedom as a value for the whole country and as an important thing. So maybe if you could just take a couple minutes each and reflect on maybe the ordering of those values, either in your work or to you personally.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, I do work with Students for Freedom, which is an organization that sprung up on campus last semester to urge when, Harvard became caught up in the Trump administration's demands to fundamentally change how Harvard is run in exchange for these various leverage points like cutting funding or threatening the visas of international students. So I was involved and have been involved in a group of students that came together to try to see how we could inspire Harvard to stand up and really be a force for rejecting illegal demands that harm its campus community. I also want to acknowledge around this table there are several members of Students for Freedom and people who worked really hard, so I hope to represent all of us too, not just my own story. But I think for me personally, being a student of government, I could sort of read a lot of the signs, and when the Trump administration in his second term started acting pretty immediately with very far-reaching authoritarian tendencies, I was very scared. And I think even more, I sort of expected that, but what I was particularly alarmed by was the reaction of civil society, how organization after organization, it felt like capitulated pretty immediately. And as a student of history and politics, you just know that in situations like that, if people are obeying in advance, if they're giving up, if they're giving in, it creates a sense that everything is futile, and that's a really dangerous dynamic. So even before I took action in any way, I was just very afraid and wanted to do what I could, and that was the motivation behind Students for Freedom. It was a bunch of students like us on campus who just felt totally powerless in the face of these much larger institutional things going on with very powerful people, and not knowing what we could do, if we could do anything, but knowing that we wanted to find others who cared so much. One of the early co-founders, his name is Carl, and he's a student from Austria, an international student, and he'd reached out to me to say, why do you American students, I get this sense that you don't think protests work, you don't think activism works, you don't think it can affect anything. He's from Austria. He said, I was involved in protesting on the streets when there was an emerging far-right coalition, and we won. So why do American students think that you can't? And I was really inspired by that. And we, got students together. This was before Harvard was particularly under the microscope, but we sort of knew that Harvard always has a lot of attention on it. We were talking about this earlier. It always does throughout the generations. And so we knew likely the fight would come to Harvard, and so we wanted to be ready when it did. So I think initially for me, it felt very focused on impacting the country.
Yeah.
Because I knew that the fight and attacks on Harvard and higher education that would likely come would be one piece in the larger democratic backsliding that we were seeing. If Harvard as an institution with a lot of symbolic power were to capitulate, it would set an example for other institutions that they can't fight this and they should just sort of give in to unlawful demands. And that's really fatal for a democracy, because the Constitution is just a piece of paper. And as Benjamin Franklin said, it's a republic if you can keep it. You have to renew it all the time. But I will say, I think what's kept me going is the community on campus. Like I think if I was just working on these big global problems, it would be absolutely soul crushing because I hear this phrase like pushing on the ocean. You feel like it's hard to see progress immediately, but having a really strong community of students on campus who can see and appreciate your work and who you feel like you're impacting, I think keeps me in it. Like I remember we did our first big rally when Harvard's funding had been frozen and it wasn't clear whether they would give in to the demands or not. And I gave like my first big rally speech and I was really afraid. Like I had no idea how it would be received. I had no idea. We assumed Harvard would probably capitulate. I had no idea if anything we had worked on would make an impact. But then a few days later, I actually I did like a Passover dinner with my best friend who's sitting there. And a girl came up, one of my friends who's an international student, came up to me at that dinner and just like gave me a hug and like her hands were shaking a little and she just was really grateful to at least have students publicly supporting international students, to have American students saying that, and just to have voices on campus pushing back and saying the hate and attacks against international students was wrong. She appreciated that. And I remember like I just thought, I have no idea if anything we're doing is going to make a difference, but if one person feels less alone, I mean, we're classmates, we're all on campus together. And so to me I think that's now what gives me hope and keeps me going.
So first, let me just say, what Students for Freedom is doing is so, so important. We are at, as you all know, a moment of authoritarian attack in which fascists, and I use that word very precisely, are controlling the federal government and are attempting to consolidate power. And it is so important what you have done and hopefully what you will continue to do. When I came to Harvard, I came through following the experiences of the civil rights movement. So I came believing in organizing, which is really essential. So I always was focused on how do we organize? How do we bring in more people? How do we create the relationships that will sustain an organization? How are we a welcoming effort and always reaching out? And of course, you have to remember in 1964 and 65 and 66, the student movement was a prophetic minority, right? There was really near consensus in support of the war.
Yeah.
College presidents, editorial boards, business leaders, political leaders, everybody supported the war. And we were the only voices speaking out. And so we had to create room for dissent. But we always had to persuade. We knew that if we couldn't reach people and convince them, and so enormous hours are spent just in the dorms and in the dining rooms and in classes. We didn't get a lot of support from the faculty. We sometimes would just hijack a class and have a discussion. And, always we were talking with people who disagreed with us. And so we had to learn how to have a real conversation with them and build a relationship and find points of commonality. And so we weren't selling the anti-war position. It wasn't like I would knock on a door and say, I'm here to tell you to be against the war. What we were doing is connecting with other young people about their fears and their hopes and their lives and what mattered to them. And through that conversation, creating points of connection that would allow us to have a discussion about the war. And over time, not in any one conversation, persuade people. But to answer your question, Archon, it was at the beginning always about organizing, about building relationships with people, building those structured relationships that support an organization, and always welcoming in people, always going out to talk to people who didn't agree with us. And every time we did an action, we were always very clear. Every demonstration, every action was an opportunity to now go back and discuss it. And I can't tell you how many people later became anti-war activists whose first discussion, at least with me, was why the hell did you do that? That's the craziest thing I ever heard. And I was like, this is overjoyed. Now we can have a conversation. Right? Why did we do that? And why over time should you as well?
That's great. So I've got a bunch of questions, but I want to create some time for people to jump in. But I just want to ask one last one, which I didn't get to circulate to both of you because I just thought about it today. And I'm really interested in what each of your vision for, or your hope, whether there's a prophetic dimension to what you and your fellow students are doing in the moment. And so it's a question about, like, for SDS, the world that you wanted to create, the society that you wanted to create was at such remove from actually existing America, at such large remove. But there was an ideal, and it was very clearly articulated in the Port Huron Statement, among other documents. And so it was a thing you're striving for. I mean, maybe it would take a very long time to get there, but there was a deep sense of hope of something a lot better than this messed up, unjust society that's killing 3 million people in Southeast Asia that we're in now. And so a question that I have, especially for Tova, but then also for Michael, what is that for you and for students you talk to? Or, and this would be sad, is it a little more defensive and tactical? And
it's a good question. I mean, I think unfortunately a lot of it has had to be defensive, but I think there's a very strong positive vision ingrained in that. I mean, not to be cheesy, but in our name, Students for Freedom, I think that tells you what we are for. Like, yeah. I think there's a strong sense of we want a country that respects personal freedom, where students can raise their hands in class and feel comfortable speaking about their opinions without worrying that they could be targeted by the government, or that they could have their visas revoked, where, researchers can seek the truth and not be hampered by whatever the agenda of the day is in government. I mean, it's not even a partisan vision. Yeah, right. Like, we have members who are across the political spectrum, and that's very consciously too what we tried to embody when we founded ourselves. Like, we wanted to have a big tent where you didn't have to agree with us on any given policy issue at all. Better if you don't, but do you agree that we all are committed to upholding this gift we've been given, which is living in a country and upholding this dream of democracy and freedom that has existed in the US very imperfectly, that each generation fights for, which is we have freedom of expression, we have freedom of religion, we can live in this pluralistic society where people are coming from all over the world, have all sorts of backgrounds and ideas, but we are in a community together, and we can disagree passionately, but without using power to try to silence those we disagree with. To me, I think that that's what's driving a lot of us at our core, although of course we care about a lot of other issues too.
So when I came to Harvard in '64, we did have that vision of a democratic society, a society in which the needs of the majority of the people came first. And I came believing that I was embarked on creating a new left, a sharp break with the old left, not focused on foreign models, not dogmatic, not state central, but a democratic left that was rooted in American experience and American language. And one of the tragedies of the war in Vietnam is that over the long years of opposing the war, we lost that vision. We became so bitter and so desperate, waking up every day feeling like if we're not better, more people will die. And that pressure of being so young, both chronologically and politically, and having so much weight really warped us over the period of the 1960s, and we lost that. Though I will say I never lost something really that I feel was such a privilege, and that was to be part of a movement that was much larger than myself, which is a wonderful experience to have, and to feel like you are directly engaged with making history is a wonderful experience, and it can only happen when you're part of organizations in a larger movement. And I want to say also, it was a very different time, very different time. We were coming off of the hope of the civil rights movement, which was so strong and so vibrant. And we also felt our generation. We were this wonderful demographic bulge that everybody was paying attention to, and marketing and making mountains out of it. And we felt that generational power. And also the economy was sailing. We didn't have to worry about, the value of our degree. We had to worry about whether we could create a moral career. So it was a very, very different time. We didn't worry about whether we would be able to get an apartment or afford a house. I mean, those were not things we worried about. And we didn't worry about crushing student debt. So it was very different. And in many ways, it was much more hopeful at the beginning. And then the desperate fight to end that vicious, vicious war took an enormous toll on all of us.
Thank you. Tova, so last comment, just taking off of Michael's, and you raised this in our little exchange before about how things we might talk about. How do you feel like, both for yourself and then for your classmates, that economic pressure and the campus culture of professionalism and I have to land the right kind of job, how does that interact with your own activism and advocacy and your efforts to try to reach out to other people to get them to be values driven and advocate for the values that they believe in?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, a lot of young people, particularly at Harvard, have become, I mean, you just look at like us as a generation, we're actually more risk adverse. We have less, lower rates of teen pregnancy, which is good, but also, less rates of smoking and drugs, but also less of us have our driver's licenses, less of us have achieved other markers of sort of youth milestones that people have in the past. And then I think you come to a place like Harvard, in my perception, there really is a strong pre-professional culture. I think the economic pressures is very real among our generation. You look at like polling, and most young people are really responding to and caring about like economic issues and affordability, which is very understandable because that's what's impacting young people very directly. And then I think Harvard, in our sort of bubble, there is a lot of pressure to do a bunch of extracurriculars and take classes that are going to set you up well to get a lucrative job post-grad. I think the world feels very big and complicated, and sort of one path you can set yourself up for is to go into consulting or investment banking or finance or a path that feels laid out. So I think that has been, I don't think it has to be a challenge in organizing, but for us, I think it has been. Like, I think there are so many opportunities and things going on at Harvard that it is honestly pretty hard to get people to show up to a protest. I think there is like a lot of fear of retribution and everything. That's one motivation. But another motivation is just the busyness. Like your schedule is filled with other endeavors and pre-professional clubs, or you're worried that your participation in activism or doing a protest could harm your career prospects. I unfortunately have friends who did like diversity, equity, inclusion roles at some of their clubs that like have changed it on LinkedIn now that they're changed the title on LinkedIn now that they're applying to jobs, which you can criticize, but also if you were young and it's your first job and you don't have other options. So I think unfortunately the incentives are that it seems like if you're involved in activism or social justice or advocacy, it could hurt the perception at least is that it could hurt your career prospects in more traditional fields, especially now under the Trump administration, where it honestly actively has been punished. And so I think that has been a factor that we've had to grapple with, both the fear of it harming your career prospects, but also just like, I don't think you can undervalue just the busyness of students these days, how much time classes are taking up, how much time extracurriculars are taken up. Activism for a lot of people is one thing among many other obligations in their lives. And I think that that's often something we think about.
Yeah, I would just say I've been around the book going to a number of campuses. And I'm talking to activists, so it's a slim slice. And I've been impressed by two things. One is the sense of insecurity that I didn't have at all and my friends didn't have. And just a sense of the precariousness of everything, from climate change to the value of my degree. But the second thing is I found that activists that I've talked to are way smarter than I was at that age. I mean, for example, they understand that you have to both protest and play in elections, and that you have to build power and be serious about building power, and that you only build power through organization. And I've been impressed with the strategic sophistication of many of the young people that I've met, which has just inspired me. And, I can't stress enough how important you all are to the future. And as much as I have really deeply ambivalent feelings about Harvard, I really do, even though I've been helping Crimson Courage and the alumni organization urge it to stand strong and support the administration. Harvard, as Tova and I were talking about before, is this elite institution, but it's also this historically important institution. And so what happens here, go back to the Vietnam War, our protests against the war got more coverage than almost any other place and was able to inspire protests across other campuses. And so I would just urge you to continue the work of Students for Freedom and know that it's really important work, elevated because of the importance, false as it may be, of Harvard.
And I think just on that note, I completely agree. And I think that's something we were aware of from the beginning, that Harvard really is just irrationally so in some ways, just like this flashpoint and this source of media attention. And so one of the first things that I did with advocacy work on campus was when funding was first frozen, the narrative was that this was being done in the name of combating campus anti-Semitism, and this issue was literally all over the news. You would read the New York Times, you would read the BBC, and this number one issue is campus anti-Semitism at Harvard and the Trump administration's response to it. But I felt that it was so, there were no students that would ever be quoted in these articles, genuinely. Not a single student would be quoted or interviewed, and the narrative had spun so out of the student voice. So what Maya, who's sitting there, and I did was we wrote, when Harvard's funding was frozen, we wrote a statement from Harvard Jewish students saying that we care about campus anti-Semitism as an issue, but the Trump administration's approach is not helping us. And it's not about us in the end. We're sort of a cover for broader ideological goals that aren't about us. And we did very much that, like, relational organizing, going to all the members of the Jewish community that we could find. If you were a Jew on campus last semester, you're probably bothered by Maya or I at least once. And we forced the question, like, do you agree with this or do you not? And in the end, we got over 115 Jewish students on campus to sign, which is a pretty big percentage of the active Jewish community. And I'm proud of it. It's also 100 students. Like, that's a lot, but in the grand scheme of millions of students in colleges, it's not crazy. We were on the front page of many outlets. Like, Maya was doing interviews from our dorm. I was like feeding her talking points, and the New York Times covered it. All the Jewish outlets covered it. NPR covered it. And in the end, actually, President Trump was asked about us at a press conference. He was asked about all of the Jewish students, like, what do you say to the Jewish students at Harvard who are protesting your approach to campus anti-Semitism? So all of that goes to show there is such a spotlight on us, and I think we feel a very acute sense of responsibility that our voices are so amplified just because we go here. And so, like, what are we going to do with that megaphone?
Very good. All right, why don't we open it up for questions, comments, thoughts, other people's experience with campus activism?
So
if you could introduce yourself.
I'm Patty Nolan, who in Harvard was one of the leaders of South Africa Solidarity Committee, and it was one of the apartheid things. So I definitely was in the activist movement here, but now I'm actually in local politics here in Cambridge and part of Crimson Courage, and big fans of both Tova and Michael. But my question has to do with the tools by which we now organize. And for both of you, because in our day when we were organizing, you put up posters because there was, I mean, it sounds so ageist, but like there was no email, there was no anything, there was no social media, there was literally just flyers. And it's stunning that we ended up getting at one point at the height 3,500 students marching through the town to protest certain kinds of things. And Michael, while you organize in a different era, right now you're organizing with very different. So I'm curious as how the fact of those tools being now available has affected organizing, because it actually can help, but it can also hurt because you can go down a dark hole of social media and we know the disjoint bubbles in a Venn diagram where people aren't listening to each other. So I'm throwing a whole bunch of messages.
And you're not in a dorm room or dining hall.
Right. So I'm just curious at the heart of it, we also still need organizations. I got involved in SASC because in my dorm was the founder of the whole protest and she got me involved. It's always comes down to those relationships. And yet there's also this explosion of different tools for organizing. I'm curious if both of you to have any take on what that means for both hope and also maybe cautions.
So I would say technology has a profound impact, and it has, as you've alluded, both positive and negative aspects. So, when I was at Harvard, we had a mimeograph machine and a Gestetner machine.
Still smell that purple ink, right?
You cut a stencil and you crank, and you'd crank and you'd crank. And so we had to develop a way to communicate with people. And so we built a system of dorm captains and could put a leaflet under every single dorm room every single week with enormous effort. And I think my hands were stained for years with purple black ink. So now you can send text messages or emails instantaneously at no cost and very little effort, and reach lots of people and share all sorts of information. So there are definitely positive aspects to that. And I think that young people, I wouldn't know, but you could educate me, I think have learned how to use social media to develop relationships. But what I would say is that the relationships are the critical part of it. And, what I think as an old person, I worry sometimes that the mediation of digital communication stops us from building the deep, authentic relationships that are critical to building sustained organization. And that's not to say that I would oppose the use of any of the technology, but I'd go back and say, I don't think there's anything that can replace a face-to-face meeting. There's anything that can replace a small group meeting. And that's not to say don't use the technology, but don't use it as a shortcut to prevent the authentic relationships that are essential. But I defer to all of you as to, the real use of technology and how it changes organizing.
No, I agree. I mean, I think to use an economics term, it's like, is technology being used as a complement or a substitute for that like in-person reaction, right? Are you in-person interaction? Like, are you using it to replace the face-to-face organizing work? In which case that could be harmful. Like, I think there is an impulse, if there's activist movements that are fully online, people can feel like by reposting something or writing something online, it's like they don't need to put in other forms of action. But I also think, to your point, it is a tremendous tool, and it's one that Students for Freedom uses a lot. We have social media accounts. Whenever we give speeches or rallies, we'll clip it and post it online to try to reach out to a wider audience. And maybe they wouldn't watch like an hour-long rally or stand in the rain for an hour, but maybe they'll watch that happened to us. Maybe they'll watch a 1-minute clip and find something they resonate with. So I think it can be a really good tool for outreach. It's a very low barrier to entry. We do newsletters. We'll do each Harvard house or club has what is called the listserv, which is like a big email list that anyone who's on it can send something to. So we'll do that a lot. There's Side Chat, which is a anonymous posting platform. If you know, and we'll like advertise for things there and sort of monitor campus discussion and sentiment on it. So I think it can help a lot. It can make things easier. We don't need to stain our hands to print flyers. But I also think we found value in the face-to-face, in-person reaction. There's no replacement for it. And also sometimes we experiment with non-technology ways of getting the word out. Like we do use posters still, and we put them up because then, even if you're not on a newsletter, you're not already engaged, it's still helpful to have that in the real world tools. And I mean, you all have in front of you a pamphlet that we printed. Actually, our members who are sitting here, it was their idea because they came to us as freshmen and said, as new students, we don't know. We see among our classmates that there's this lack of awareness about what happened in the spring, where the sort of heat of the funding cuts and international students' visas being revoked happened. But a lot of new students on campus might not even have that common base of knowledge and experience, which was making organizing harder. And so they suggested and spearheaded this project to create a pamphlet to share student stories and summarize what happened before you got to campus. And we printed those out. We didn't just release that online. I mean, we did put them in dorm mailboxes for people to see. So I think there's, Patty, to your point, just value in both.
I would just add one thing on this, which is, again, an illustration of the use, the positive and the negative. So we talk a lot in organizing about the ladder of engagement and the real need to get people into that first steps. You have a funnel and you're going up. And so, for example, signing online petitions is a super easy first step. But I sometimes think that people confuse that with power. And the question is, how do we build sufficient power to win the campaigns and on the long term to transform society and make it more democratic? And so if we're not moving people from the petition signing into more of a relationship and structuring those relationships in organizations and building the power that we need, whether that's the power to change Harvard or the power to resist authoritarianism, I think we both can use it positively, but we need to be careful.
Back here, yeah.
Hi, I'm Niyati Singh. I actually have a statistics final exam, but I really wanted to attend this session. It's tomorrow. I'm an MPP at Harvard Kennedy School. One of the main reasons I was here, and I wrote it in my Harvard essay as well, is animal rights. And very recently, as of last week, I founded a new caucus called Animal Rights Caucus. But as you can tell, this is a deeply entrenched problem and it's a global problem. And while all your stories were so inspiring, my question to you is, how do you take something, an idea, say from a college or an institution, to like subnational and national levels and possibly a global level? Like, how do you like tackle with a deeply entrenched problem and actually make change in the world?
I feel like you're better.
It's a very hard challenge. You should join Marshall's network of global organizers and activists who are grappling with this very question all the time. I don't have much experience, to be very blunt, taking things globally. I've never participated in that. The anti-war movement spread globally, but it wasn't because we organized it. It was because the war was so horrendous that people all around the world organized against it. I do have experience trying to go off campus, and there it takes a very careful, deliberate strategy of trying to understand who you're trying to reach, what are their concerns, and to do it in a very respectful way. I often say to people, you can't organize people you don't love. You have to love them to organize. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them at all, but you have to respect them and love them and listen to them and engage them where they are and not police their language and their habits without sacrificing your own principles. But I don't have experience on global. I would say that Marshall's network, seriously, you should talk to him. because they are trying to do that in a very thoughtful and intentional way. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Definitely not made it to the global level yet. Maybe I'll
Do you
work on it.
see yourself as part of, broader efforts on other campuses for
Yeah,
freedom of expression and academic freedom and independence?
definitely. So I think Harvard was one of the earliest schools to
Mm.
really be under pressure, but we've since seen that the Trump administration is not limiting his attacks to Harvard or Columbia. He's had initiatives like the Compact, where he's essentially targeting all of higher education. And I mean, we see that this is a playbook where you go institution by institution and try to, that you wouldn't be powerful enough to take everyone down at once. So you divide and conquer and you go institution by institution. And if they don't have this cross-institution collaboration, then you'll sort of all fall individually. And I think there's like no other way around it. I think we knew this from the beginning. We'll do what we can at Harvard, but we can't only influence Harvard, because if each institution is on its own, we'll all fail. So I think from the beginning, we certainly were very in contact with very much in contact with other campuses. I know on the Jewish student activism side, pretty immediately, we were strategic about that. So the Justice Department has what's called the Trail Task Force on Anti-Semitism, which was investigating 9, I believe, schools for campus anti-Semitism. And so they had this very consistent playbook where they would start investigating a school for anti-Semitism, and then they would use that as leverage to press these sweeping demands that didn't really have anything to do with anti-Semitism. They had just done that to Columbia, then they went to Harvard. It wasn't kind of rocket science to know that maybe they would keep going down that list of schools. So I reached out I had a goal to connect with a Jewish student leader across all of those schools and create sort of strategy on how do we, when the news comes, when media outlets come to interview students, how do we make sure we're the ones who are having a very well thought out, genuine message that we're saying and speaking with the Jewish community. And so we co-wrote this op-ed that was published in the Forward, a Jewish magazine that was having like a pro-democracy message. And I think that did make a difference. Like in the hearing on campus anti-Semitism, it was referenced like multiple times by other speakers. And so I've seen that cross-campus advocacy really does matter, particularly in this line of work. So I think from the beginning, that's been a priority.
Yeah, that's great. You should look at a chapter in Michael's book on this is like talking to people who are from very different backgrounds. So I think it's an anti-war march that they're organizing maybe in Lowell. And so, it's a bunch of college kids organizing in a very working class community. And during the march, they have an NLF flag, which is the National Liberation Front, which is it's a NVA. It's a North Vietnamese Army flag. It's an NVA flag. And that's at the front of the march. And then after the march, they're talking to some Vietnam veterans in a coffee shop. And the Vietnam veterans are saying, well, we're really sympathetic to your cause. We lived through the war. We don't like it either, but there's no way we could march with you because our brothers died, with people fighting with that flag. And so it was like just a really, and the parallels today are pretty clear. I won't go into that. But it was just a really clear example of a failure to understand and empathize and sit in the shoes of who you're trying to address and develop a relationship with. And, in my view, it's a particular kind of impulse of Kennedy School students to do a lot more talking than listening. So I think it's really good to look at that chapter. Yeah. Time for one more question.
Thank you. Barak Sala, I'm a research fellow here at the Middle East Initiative and a student here from 23 to 24. So this question is to Tova, but Michael, you can also jump in. And I'm bringing this up just because this is very central to your messaging. 75% of Jews basically don't support Trump. You can guess that at Harvard, the community is
closer to 100. Yeah.
Okay. And there's about 7% of the Harvard student body is Jewish. So 115 is impressive, but it's not a lot. And I think it is indicative of many Jews here who are feeling more and more politically homeless, who felt that anti-Semitism was not well addressed at Harvard, was a major issue. Trump took a very strong stance, but was, sweeping measures that were harming our, different rights here. So my question is, how do you make us? And I think many, and as a Jewish student in this community, I think it's a very prevalent sentiment that a lot of people feel that they're sort of stuck on both sides, that they were not feeling addressed by Harvard for 2 years, and then when the answer came, they also it didn't, and it's pushing many people outside of the community out of engagement. So my question is, one, how do you even bring this community in a way that doesn't feel, well, because even if you look at the pamphlet, it's sort of out of context of why this started to happen. It's not like the background, the director of FXB was removed, but there were claims of why they were removed, and one can argue if they were justified or not. So how do you lead, as a Jewish leader, how do you address that? Like, what's the relationship like? How do you bring people in who are maybe disengaging?
Actually, the Jewish community.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very real issue. I think that sense of feeling politically homeless, having very nuanced feelings about these issues is very prevalent. I mean, I felt it myself. And I think from the beginning, there was this false dichotomy that was sort of forced onto Jewish students, that either you think campus anti-Semitism isn't a problem and everything's exaggerated, and it's all overblown, or you support the Trump administration's really sweeping approach where there's demands that have nothing to do with anti-Semitism, and you see your classmates getting hurt, and you're losing job opportunities, and your Jewish international classmates are being kicked off campus, et cetera, et cetera. And I think from the beginning, I knew that neither of those positions represented the majority of the Jewish community. And so part of it is making space for that nuance. It's really hard to do. I think especially post October 7th, campus community was just very polarized. I mean, I was a student here throughout all of it. It felt very isolating and lonely to be a Jewish student on campus. And so I think a lot of that suspicion comes from a very real place. And so the first step was making space for that nuance and refusing to fall into easy narratives. We would always say, every time we spoke out, we would always start by saying, and we still do, campus anti-Semitism is a real issue and we care about it and we deserve real, honest solutions. And a lot of us do have criticisms of Harvard, but that doesn't mean we have to accept the narrative that the government is pushing, that these attacks are about us. Like I testified for the Commission on Civil Rights this week, and one other student with me was a Harvard Jewish student, modern Orthodox, and she actually was the victim of a hate crime. Her mezuzah, which is a Jewish religious symbol, was ripped off her door her first day of Harvard. Really brutal. And Harvard didn't really react perfectly to it. I mean, they didn't really offer her enough accommodations. They didn't give her the option to move rooms, and she was angry about it. It's unacceptable. And at the same time, she used the bulk of her testimony to talk about how much it hurt to have that story instrumentalized by the Trump administration. She's not political at all. She's a STEM student, but she had this real sense of pain that her story, she said the Justice Department, they kept releasing these reports citing her story, and never once did they talk to her. Never once did they interview her or reach out to her. It was very clear her story was being used as a weapon. And as a STEM student, she worried about the labs that were losing money. She'd worked in public health centers here that became completely defunded. And so she saw the impacts of it. So I think it's been highlighting stories like that, refusing to be boxed in to a simple narrative, and trying to make space for people who have complicated feelings. I think with the letter too, one thing we tried to do was get as wide a range of signatories as possible, because the Jewish community itself was very polarized, still is in many ways. But when you look at the signatories of the letter, there were students from all different religious communities within campus, all different political views, who had very different views on any given issue, but felt that this was wrong. And so we're willing to sign it. On the numbers thing too, I think I just want to emphasize how hard it was to get, like it is to just get signatures on anything. I think it's a very fair point that like, you know,
Especially
it's not,
these days.
it's
right?
not
I mean,
hundreds
there's
and hundreds, but that was one of the revelations of that experience was how much fear there is
Yeah,
on campus
yeah,
right now. Like that was one thing that revealed for me. Because I would go and I would talk to Jewish students on campus, and like I would honestly say the vast majority I spoke to agreed with the message of the statement. It's certainly not all, and there's nuanced views, but the majority were like, I agree with you. But not the majority also didn't sign because not because they didn't agree with it, but because there was genuine fear that it could harm them
Yeah.
politically. We didn't have a single Jewish international student sign the statement because they just felt like signing their name to the statement would just be a death sentence for their visa. We had Jewish international students who like revoked their signatures out of fear. So it was a really it was a revelation for me. Just it showed me how dire things were and are on campus, that you have students who might agree with the statement but like are too afraid to sign their name. You know, in America, like it shows how much freedom of expression has, you know, declined within the first year of the second Trump administration. But I really respect your question, and that's definitely something I think very consciously about.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't, I can't get into the details of the Jewish community at Harvard. I know nothing. But I would say there's a larger issue that this is part of. And that issue is this: Trump and the Trump administration are destroyers. And they're attacking all across the federal government and our institutions. And they need to be resisted. So the impulse is they attack, we defend. The strategic trap is that we defend a status quo that has failed. And so we both have to find how to oppose the Trump authoritarian destruction, but propose an alternative that is not the status quo, but is change that really expresses our deepest values and will work for the vast majority of people. I want to put in one last plug. So again, I think the work that you all are doing is really important. And here's my plug. One, you're already doing this. Recruit younger students, because the key to lasting student activism is to develop the younger, because every 4 years people are matriculating out. And the second thing is think about becoming organizers. You know, everybody has recruitment for law firms and businesses and architecture, and just think a little bit about what life could be if you decided to pursue organizing, because the fight that we're in now is going to intensify over the next years. And whatever happens, I can guarantee you what we need are many, many, many more organizers who are committed to learning the craft and are committed to building movements that will shape our democracy and fight for your future, which is to fight for the country's future.
Thank you very much. Your question really made me kind of think that the bracket of student organizing from Michael to Tova really, especially for you in organizing part of the Jewish community, is similar in that, you know, Michael, you're addressing students who are largely in favor of the Vietnam War or who haven't thought about it, you know, valence wise. And so you're also having these very difficult conversations in, you know, kind of they just are difficult, right? And the nuance fails. And that's kind of unlike a bunch of movements in between you guys, right? So in like fighting apartheid in South Africa on campus, there's not a lot of people that are for apartheid. You know, there's people who don't like the shanties that are messing up the quad, but that's not because they like apartheid. And I think on campuses, the movement for Black Lives similarly is most people were pretty sympathetic, even if they weren't themselves active and march for our lives. So you guys are like both it's interesting, kind of a U of, yeah, we're having to address very, people who disagree or who are in the middle in this very ambiguous spot.
I will say though, I think like last spring, I think the magnitude of the level of the threat honestly did really bring our campus community together. Like even the New York Times wrote an article partly about covering a Students for Freedom rally, talking about the diversity of students who are willing to stand up and give a speech. We had Jacob Miller, who's the student president of Hillel, who's very like the face of advocating against campus anti-Semitism and criticizing Harvard for their inadequate response. And then we also had students who were involved in the pro-Palestinian movement. And the New York Times literally covered that moment because we had a student activist who'd been involved in the pro-Palestinian movement introduce Jacob before he gave his speech. And that truly would have been unimaginable under any other circumstances. Like they would maybe not even be seen together previously, but the magnitude of the threat, it didn't feel like we were working against the campus community in that sense. It felt like in many ways we were coming together. And as someone who was on campus during a lot of, during really tense time my sophomore year after October 7th and the war in Gaza and the polarization there, it honestly felt like a moment of hope because so many different students were coming together and saying, we can disagree with each other on a lot of things, but we agree that we should each have the right to speak, and that when someone comes in and threatens our community and revokes visas for international students or tries to silence people, we're against that. So in many ways, it felt very unifying.
Yeah, and I would say, there's this profound difference. And again, I'm not suggesting there aren't difficulties and divisions, but when we were against the war, particularly when we started out, I'll tell you one funny thing. I remember passing out leaflets in the spring of '65 and having sophisticated Harvard students say to me, I don't know, maybe there's an issue in Indochina and Vietnam, maybe, but the president of the United States never lies.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah, we don't have that over.
But also, I would say, unlike when we were starting to oppose the war, there is a clear anti-MAGA majority in this country. We should be very clear about that. The question is, can it be organized? And can it build sufficient political power in every institution in the society and political power for the elections as well? And can it build it fast enough to resist the consolidation of power by the authoritarians in MAGA? And so that's a very different environment and very different problem, and says what's critical is building that big tent, welcoming everybody, saying we can disagree about lots of other things, but defending American democracy, freedom of speech, and figuring out how to make the country work for a majority of us is something we can all agree on. And one of the things I would say, which really touches Harvard, is we're also living in a time where every day there is more and more evidence of the profound betrayal of elites. And the Epstein documents and the Epstein class vividly document that, but it's across the board. When you think about the 2008 economic crisis, when you think about climate change, when you think about the vast inequalities of wealth, we see over and over again the complete betrayal by our elites. And I think you can find many of those touch Harvard very directly. But we have the possibility of building a majoritarian movement, and our aspirations, whether it's at Harvard or anywhere else, should be majoritarian aspirations and building the organizations that can sustain those aspirations.
Thank you very much, both of you. It's incredibly inspiring, and it's motivated me to make a suggestion that Marshall's organizing class be incorporated into the required curriculum, because people will have an experience of doing something very important that is very rewarding and for themselves. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.